All right, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. If you didn't already see it in the chat, it'd be nice if folks can chat who they are and where they're coming from in the Zoom chat, so we know who's here, and so other folks can see who's on the call as well. So here we are. Welcome to the US Web Design System monthly call for December 2019. Here in this slide deck, at least, it's holly jolly winter wonderland. My name is Dan Williams, and I'm the product lead for the US Web Design System, and I've got my virtual ugly USWDS Christmas sweater on. In real life, I have a different ugly sweater on right now. And got a number of things to talk about today, so let's see what's on the agenda. There are a few product updates, some interesting USWDS site launches. And then I'm going to try to get through 10 big design system questions from 2019, and we will see if I can do it. And then after those 10 questions, I've got sort of an easier question for you, and we'll see how all that goes, and if there's time, some Q&A. I think this will be a relatively packed episode of the show, so let's get along with it. First up, product updates. Yesterday, we released a new version of the design system, USWDS 2.4.0, with a couple of notable features. And as I'm presenting here today, we're going to be posting links in the chat. So keep an eye open for links in the chat if I'm making a reference here on screen. So yeah, USWDS 2.4.0, a couple notable new features. Probably the biggest one is that it allows non-token color values in the theme color settings. While the design system, promotes and encourages using our system tokens in the theme color settings, agencies sometimes, have a real need to occasionally use non-token colors. This includes instances where certain colors are literally mandated by law and cannot be easily changed. So we want to support teams that use the design system. We support using tokens, but we also know that tokens aren't the end all and be all when it comes to colors. So now teams can add non-token colors to theme color settings, like making theme color primary whatever hex or whatever RGB is necessary and appropriate for your project. This new non-token value of primary would then apply anywhere the primary token is used, and that applies to any theme token, like primary, secondary, accent, those kinds of tokens. And so those tokens can be set with any color, and those new theme tokens can be used in functions, mix-ins, settings, and utilities, anywhere the theme token can be used. Now, using non-token values will throw a warning in the compile process, but this warning, like all compile warnings, can be disabled in settings. In general settings, there's a theme show compile warning setting, which you can set to false if you want to hide warnings. And we're really just hoping that this will help get more folks in the door with the design system. Something we've heard a lot that is a necessary thing for some teams, and I'm happy to be able to introduce it now. Next, USWDS 2.4.0 handles deprecations more gracefully. Occasionally the design system will deprecate variables or functionality like a function or a mix-in or something like that, or we'll kind of rename it. As the design system grows, we're always trying to update our naming and our ordering so that the design system makes as much sense as possible and that things do what you expect them to do. And that means that sometimes things change. But so now we're going to try to be a little bit better about when things change, doing a couple things to support that change. Now we're going to display a deprecation message in the terminal when you're compiling your design system SAS to sort of better communicate these changes. So as you're compiling, it'll say, hey, USWDS 2.4.0 has like these changes in it, like you should check to make sure that your markup is up to date, or if you see this kind of an error, check this in your code. Like the other notification, this can be disabled in settings. So when you tire of seeing that message, turn it off. And we're also improving backward compatibility by supporting the deprecated variables, functions, and mixins throughout the major version cycle. So if we change a variable name, we will change that variable name like in the settings, but then we'll also provide a way through a separate file to like map that new variable, map the old variable to the new variable. So if you're using the old variable in your files and your code will continue to work, even though we've changed the name of the variable that we're officially using. And we'll continue to support these deprecated variables and functions and mixins throughout the major version cycle. So this way we can continue to improve how our code is structured while minimizing the effects of restructuring on your projects. And now components reliably respect their font settings. I don't know if other folks have noticed this when trying to adjust your settings to change like the font of the banner or the font of the footer. There are some instances, depending on certain combinations of settings, where setting values in something like the theme footer font family should change the font face for the entire component. But there are some CSS specificity quirks that were kind of overriding the settings in some instances. So we really kind of analyzed that and tried to make sure that the font settings were working the way we expected them to work, and no secret overrides. And bugs. We also fixed a couple bugs. Focus outline wasn't getting the proper offset. Now it is. Tables weren't collapsing their cells properly. Now they are. And this is all updated in USWDS Gulp and in USWDS Sandbox as well. And that's out now. We also released a security update to the USWDS 1.x branch. And by our current accounting, GitHub scanning, SNCC, NPM auditing, it has no vulnerabilities. So if you're using the 1.x branch for a project and you're kind of current on 1.x, you should check out 1.6.13 because it makes some big changes to how many vulnerabilities are in that package. And we'll be continuing to update that going forward as the vulnerability landscape changes. And also, as we go forward, we're going to be tagging the V1 branch as V1 in NPM. This will prevent an unfortunate incident we saw when publishing 1.6.13, where the 1.x branch in NPM was automatically tagged as latest. And for a short period of time, if you were installing USWDS at latest, you were getting the 1.x branch instead of the 2.x branch. But that won't happen again, because now the 1.x branch is going to get a label on it and will no longer be mislabeled as latest. So as always, really, thank you to the design system community for flagging issues quickly. Like, we want to respond when something is a real problem, and I really appreciate how folks can bring things to our attention really quickly. It makes a difference. And speaking of the community, we've had a few site launches in the last month. We've got a highly customized 1.x site from the census, accelerate.census.gov. A new site for Amber Alert from DOJ. And 18F's enormously useful accessibility guide as well. I refer to this all the time, and you might as well. And our friends at Digital.gov released a major new version of their site as well. And it's great, and you should check that out. This was a big month. Great work. It's really inspiring to see how teams build with the design system. And not only has it been like a big month, but it's been a big year. It's December. It's been a big decade even. USWDS's first decade. We released Design System 2 in April, and we've had 8 monthly calls since. We've had a lot of discussions with teams across the federal government this year. And it's been great to see so many of you virtually and in person. And with so many changes in 2019 and likely another big year in 2020, it felt like it made sense to wrap up the year by trying to answer some of the bigger design system questions we've heard from teams throughout the year. So over the rest of the call, I'll try to get through the 10 big questions folks have been having, the 10 big questions we've been hearing as we talk to teams across government. So without any further ado, we'll kind of just jump into our 10 big questions. It's like, okay, number one, why should I use the web design system? Well, generally, we try to think of this answer as really kind of the network effects of mutual support. Use the design system to get on common tools, to use common knowledge, and to benefit from common expectations. Using the design system in government means shifting the question at the start of a project from like, how do we do that, to something that's more like, how can we adapt and adopt what they did? And we've learned that this has particular value in government, as government teams are looking for government examples. They're looking for government code to use. We're often looking to explicitly connect our work to work that other teams are doing, to build off of their work instead of starting from scratch, and to build the processes that allow others to build from our work when we're gone. And this sense of connection and of slower process-based change is something that, in the long view, we trust government to do best. And this is something I like to think of as continuity. You could think of one of the primary roles of government as that of continuity, to connect us over time and space through commonality. Now, continuity is a way to value both difference and connection, and to allow and encourage communication across a system. So there's always some way to get from A to B to Z and beyond. Continuity, connection, promotes network effects, the way that systems get more useful the more they're used. And these commonalities have a number of real discrete benefits to teams. That everyone is working from the same toolkit, that there's increased interoperability and reusability of solutions, that it's easier to share solutions, that improvements we develop are a lot easier to propagate and scale, and there's less fiddling and faster building. And it promotes common knowledge, like there's more reliable institutional memory. You have to work less at institutional memory because a lot of it is built into the design system. And that there are shared skills regardless of team or team composition, regardless of getting new team members from different places. Folks are coming in with a similar background of knowledge. It makes it faster and easier to start projects, and it strengthens the community. And it also sort of sets common expectations. Teams are pulling in the same direction. Teams across agencies, within agencies, are pulling in the same direction. That's easier to iterate on existing projects. Using the design system on a project makes it easier to judge the success of your project. And it makes it easier to justify your decisions to those whose you need to justify your decisions. And it provides greater continuity sort of across the entire space, sort of entire digital space of government. It's like it is in a way like it's an easy button for government websites for so many reasons, and just using it, the more people use it, the more it makes it better. Number two, so how do you define using the design system? What does it mean to use the design system? What's a design system at all? Brad Frost, I think, describes it really well as a design system is like the official story of how your organization designs and builds digital products. You know, and while a conventional story might have characters taking actions directed by motivations and goals, you could also think of the story of a building or building's construction as the story of materials combined through blueprints and construction codes in the service of business needs, of user needs, city plans, zoning. Similarly, the story of a design system like USWDS is the story of code, combined through guidance in the service of design principles. So to look at it in another way, we see the code. What are the tools that we use? Leading through guidance, like what do we do with those tools? And principles. How do we know if we're doing the right thing? Now, for some time, the design system has had internal design principles to guide the development of USWDS as a project. These were and are ways for our team to assess at a high level if we're heading in the right direction. You know, and these are our current internal product principles. Put user needs first, to make it easy to do the right thing. That accessibility is fundamental, that we should be starting from existing solutions. That we're trying to be consistent, but not static, and that we should be sharing what we do. And this is where they live on our site right now, that we're thinking of them as product principles, product design principles. And we know that simply implementing design system code is like no guarantee of building a successful product. You know, over the last year or two, we've talked with teams across government about why they use or don't use the design system and what contributes to making a project successful. And this advice that we hear from across government is remarkably consistent. So we know that our product principles are still useful for us. We still need internal product principles, but the idea behind our internal design principles is also more broadly useful and should be more broadly applied. And that there's a role for higher level guidance for using the design system. And that's something that we're calling USWDS design principles. And this is high-level guidance for using the design system, guidance that any USWDS project should incorporate. And this is guidance that teams will find really familiar. Start with user needs, earn trust, embrace accessibility, promote continuity, and listen. We've published these design principles here at designsystem.digitalgov/design principles. These principles are sort of talking about a little bit more about what these things sort of mean, how they relate to one another. We're looking at key questions you can ask to sort of think about these principles, resources that are available to learn more about how teams can do this, and sort of practical actions that sort of any team could take to work in service of these principles. And when you think about how you're using the design system, you know, the appropriate lens is through this model of principles, guidance, and code. And together, principles, guidance, and code are the design system maturity model, sort of a framework for evaluating your usage of the design system and how you can think about applying the US Web Design System to any project. Now, the design system isn't only about code and colors and components. We consider the principles to be the baseline, the principles themselves to be really the baseline for design system maturity. Like, are you starting from real user needs? Like, are you embracing accessibility? These things are what these are the end goal of why we're building sites with the design system. So they're kind of like the baseline for getting in the door with the design system. Teams using the design system should start by integrating these principles and then adopting And then adopting the design system usability guidance, like, okay, are our buttons the right size? Are we thinking about the text of our buttons by starting with an action? Using the usability guidance that we have in the design system in the service of the principles, and then adding the code. Each of these maturity stages should be mutually reinforcing. Using the usability guidance should support user needs, trust, accessibility, continuity. Design system code should support our usability guidance. These are all very sort of interrelated ideas. So we've published this maturity model at designsystem.digital.gov/maturity model. With the maturity model and the design principles, as I've said, we've outlined sort of key considerations, resources, and practical actions that support them. It's far from an exhaustive list when you're talking about something like embracing accessibility. It's not just doing 6 or 8 things, but it's a framework of how to use the design system well. Because using the design system, isn't like it's not a like binary, one-time off and on switch. It's not either you do or you don't use the design system. Rather, like using the design system is a continuous iterative process over time. More of a dimmer or a rheostat. So how do you define using the design system? To use the design system is to demonstrate maturity over time. It's not about this or that token or that default. There are many practical and creative ways to use the design system to support your agency, your mission, and user needs. It's all really about looking at your decisions over time through the lens of principles, guidance, and code. Okay, sure, but it doesn't have the functionality our team needs. What do I do about that? Well, when the design system doesn't have the functionality that your team needs, and you're almost to some degree guaranteed that it won't because we're still building it out, and you're going to find gaps. And so the main things you do when the design system doesn't have what you need out of the box: ask the community, get into something like the design system Slack, or reach out to us through our email and see if we or others can point you in the direction of some solution that teams have already developed. Check in with the design system roadmap, and we'll see a little bit more about that later. Is something that you're working on something that we are also working on? Work to adapt existing solutions. If you see something that exists in some other code base, there are probably ways to begin to adapt it into the design system through the lens of the maturity model. And as you do that, reach out to the community, contribute back, think about contributing it into the design system as through a GitHub issue or a pull request, and begin to answer folks when folks ask of the community, hey, do we have something for sorting data tables? And so, like other answers, it's worth sort of returning to the design system maturity model. As you develop and integrate custom solutions and perhaps outside code, look at it through the lens of maturity. Like, how well does any solution you're considering fit within this model? And like, what can your team do to improve that fit? Like, if you're have you tested this thing against real user needs? Like, does it meet best practice accessibility? Like, is it consistent with the other things that are on your site? Is it in the service of a continuous experience? These are the kinds of considerations that you would ask as you're bringing something into the system. And so that's the general approach that we recommend for adding to the system when the current functionality doesn't meet your needs. How do I stay up to date with changes to the design system? Well, there are 3 kind of, I think, major ways to keep up to date with the design system. One is our public Slack at USWDS Public. That's where most public conversations happen around the design system and what we're doing. Also, certainly these monthly calls. The monthly calls is where we try to talk about what we have done and what we're expecting to do in the future. And we also have a sprint board that's up at GitHub. Like, of course, you can go to GitHub. You can look through our issues and pull requests and follow along in that way. But you can also go check out the USWDS sprint board directly on GitHub. You can see it here. It's at github.org/USWDS/project/1. Cool URL. But that's a way to get a look at what we're doing, what's on deck, and to see how things are sort of progressing through our workflow. So if you are interested in being more connected to what the design system is doing, an interesting place to look would be on our sprint board. Also, as I've mentioned before, like we have notifications that are sort of new in Design System 2.4. So as you are updating your versions of the design system, we're going to be calling out like short summaries of critical changes in the CSS compile time. So you can see what we've been doing, what's been changing, what you might need to change on your end to stay up to date with the design system. And of course, this can be hidden with a setting as well when you've read it 20 times and you don't need to read it a 21st time. Also, we're going to try to get better at Twitter in 2020. Haven't been that great about it in 2019, but it's a goal. So I'm not technical. How do I implement the design system? Well, I think there's lots of ways to think about using the design system, even if you're not a technical person. I think one of the first things that can be really interesting now is to check out the maturity model and to check out the design principles, and to think about those things. Not all the things in the maturity model and the design principles are technical things. Some of these things you can think about more from a program standpoint or a project standpoint or from a team and activities standpoint. There are lots of ways to begin to think about design system maturity that are not technical. And you could use the maturity model to perform a maturity assessment. I'm expecting that that's what I want to talk about next month, is about what that might mean. I would love to look at the maturity model and look at what we're doing on our design system website and as a product and do that for myself. So I'm going to perform a maturity assessment on myself. It's possibly gross to say that out loud, but that's what I'm going to do, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that next month. You can also just reach out to your agency, and you can ask them what other teams around you are doing. Look to existing solutions, and you can also build the design system into your contracts. You can add references and links to the design system maturity model and 21st century idea into something like a performance work statement or into evaluation factors in a contract. And as I said, we'll be talking more about maturity assessments next month. So think about digging more into that as we move forward. Okay, so seriously, for the last time, what is a design token? We know that design tokens are a new concept, both new to the design system and somewhat new to design systems in general. But tokens aren't something that we made up out of thin air. They are sort of an accepted term of art in the world of design systems. And this is a great sort of succinct definition that I pulled from the web. Design tokens are named entities that store visual design information. These are used in place of hard-coded values, such as hex values for color or pixels for spacing, in order to maintain a scalable, consistent system for UI development. I think that's a really good way to talk about it. It's all well and good. But I'm here today to talk about Mr. Potato Head. So you're familiar with Mr. Potato Head. He's a potato with holes. Each hole can accept some sort of accessory or plug-in part. And he's kind of like an old school avatar builder where you're switching out eyes and hair and ears, nose, etc., to give him a new look. So, here's the thing, each body part or accessory that you're switching in and out, different noses, different hands, something like that, that's a design token. In your Mr. Potato Head component, you've got your ear tokens, you've got your nose tokens, mustache token, an arm token, a leg token, a hat token, eyes and mouth. Like all of these things, all of these different properties that you can sort of switch in and out. You can change his hats, but you might only have 5 hats. Tokens are properties that you can switch in and out of something, like hats or eyes for Mr. Potato Head. So here's a Mr. Potato Head with no styling and all the tokens on the table. You can see his eyes tokens. You can see his mouth tokens. And here's a Mr. Potato Head not necessarily following accepted design principles or UX guidance. When you think about design tokens, I think really you can think about Mr. Potato Head. They're the little pants, mustaches, ears, and eye options available to build that, to build your own like potato head in line with your mission and audience needs. Number 7, what's the right way to add code, USWDS code, to a project? So I think in general, when we're talking about adding code to a project, that there are a few like basic stages in doing this. Like to add design system code to a project, you gotta like get it, build it, add it, and adapt it. So you've got to install the source files via something like Node Package Manager. You want to build that, you want to compile that code from source with something like gulp to reach into that source file, compile it into working CSS. You add that compiled CSS and JavaScript and markup into your templates, and then you adapt it. You can go back into the settings and into custom CSS and can adjust it and extend it to suit your needs. So get it, build it, compile it, add it, adapt it. So what does that mean sort of in practice? And to try to do that live, I will try to add it to a demo project of mine here. Here I am with my amazing Bootstrap site that I have taken sort of directly from the Bootstrap demo pages. It's a pretty good site, pretty proud of it. It looks like it's ready to go. But now I'd like to think about maybe adding the design system to this project. So I got to think about like getting the source and building the source and adding it to this project. So for me, the best way to think about this is with USWDS gulp. And the setup in USWDS gulp sort of can walk you through both getting the source, setting up the settings, and compiling it. It sort of does all of those things. And you run a few commands in the terminal, and I'm going to sort of walk through it a little bit right now. The first step is that you got to sort of install a bunch of things with npm into your project. So if I come back over here into my project, it's over here in my little demo. I want to install the source into it. I do it with this npm install thing that straight from USWDS gulp that does a bunch of stuff. And what it does is it goes out and it collects all of the various code that the design system needs to build itself and compile itself into your project. And then what we're going to do is once it installs all of that code into our project, we're going to set up some settings files, and then we're going to use those settings files to compile the source into working CSS and JavaScript. All right, so it's done all of this stuff. It's installed all of the source into our project. If we come back over here to our project, it's put it all here in this thing called node modules. There's a lot of crud in node modules, but one of the important things that's in node modules is this thing USWDS, which happens to be all of the USWDS source for USWDS 2.4.0. And if we come back over here now, the steps ask you to do a couple kinds of things. And for this project, I don't already have this thing called a gulp file, which is a sort of task manager. Essentially, it does certain things to files, and what it's going to be doing in this instance is taking our source files and compiling them into working CSS and putting them somewhere. So I'll use this to get my gulp file out into a place I can use it, into the root of my project directory. I'll do that, and I see that it has appeared here. This is the gulp file. This is the thing that has magically appeared in my root. And when I have this gulp file, now I just have to set up a few options in this gulp file to get it to work properly. I want to put it somewhere. So I want the project SAS files that I'm building from to go into my project root. So typically they'll live somewhere like SAS. This is where the settings files and things will go that we're working from for the project. Where will the images go? Well, we'll put them in assets, USWDS image. And we'll do a similar kind of thing for the fonts. Put the fonts over in fonts. We'll put the JavaScript in JS. And we'll put the compiled CSS over in USWDS CSS. And then sometimes Jekyll can act a little weird. This is just a little bit of an override to say, okay, where is it actually being compiled for Jekyll? This is how my Bootstrap site is built in Jekyll. This sort of forces the compile to go to another location to make sure that it always overrides properly. So we want this to go to site assets USWDS CSS. And we're going to just uncomment this next line for Jekyll to work without quirks. So we'll save this. We've got all of our things set up. We want to put our project thing in SAS. We're going to put all of our assets in an assets USWDS location, and we are all good to go. And so what? And this is all in the instructions here. And now I run this command here called gulp init. and that sets up my project for me. And we'll see what it does in just a moment. So what it's done are a couple things. You can also see the notifications popping up right here. So this is how notifications will appear in your build. The build finished and the init finished. And if I come back over here into my project, I can see that it has added some things in the places that I asked them to add. It has added all of the USWDS settings files into a SAS directory. These are all the color settings and component custom settings, etc. And it's made an entry point for the CSS. This is what puts everything together. In the SAS world, it imports all of my styles and settings, and then it imports the source code, and then it might import any custom styles at the end. So settings, source, custom. And it went through and it built it all, and it put the compiled CSS all over here. So now I have this compiled CSS in my project. And now I have the JS as well, compiled over here. So in my project, I can go through and add those. I can add those links over there. So now I can add this up here, and I have assets USWDS CSS styles. Great. That links to the style sheet. So now the style sheet is added to my template. And I will add similarly the JavaScript at the end. Adding the JavaScript here, assets USWDS JS, and save that. And now if I come back over to my project and I set it up again, come back over here, here's my project, reload it, and good, nothing has changed. I added the design system to my project and it didn't do anything to it. That is what I was hoping to do. The design system shouldn't do anything to your project until you choose to do something to it. And right now we're going to choose to do something like add the banner. So if we're going to add the banner to our site, we can go over onto the design system website, open up the old component code, grab it, copy it, bring it back to our project, dump it over in our, up here, and then update some of the image references. So this wanted it to look in assets image. We actually want to look in assets USWDS image. So I just update a couple links to make sure they're pointing in the right direction. Assets USWDS, assets USWDS, save that up, come back here, and wait for it to do its thing. And ta-da! There we are. We've added our banner to the top of my Bootstrap site. And if we wanted to be even more sort of advanced about it, we could go back over here into the settings, and we could do something like, we're importing all of the USWDS code right now. We don't need to import all of the USWDS code just for adding our banner. We could import just the banner package. So we have to first import a couple required in global. We add the banner package, save it up, come back over here. We run gulp watch to continue recompiling. It just did all the recompile. We can come back over and we will see that nothing should have changed. on our page, except we used about 1/10 of the code. And then we could still go in and make some additional changes if we wanted to change how it's the spacing of the banner on the page. We could make it change its max width from desktop to full. Have it recompile, and we'll see that the banner will move from being sort of narrow to expanding the whole width. Did you do it? Oh, you monkey. Well, I don't know why it didn't do it there. Better max width. Yeah, well, might just be something acting silly. Oh well, sometimes things don't work. But it should work. I don't know what I did wrong. But let's not look into what I did wrong and just think that I did get the banner onto the page. I added it into my Bootstrap project, and I have it set up to compile when I need it to compile, and to add new settings when I need that in a project. So, and that is adding code to a project. So, question number 8, what's on your roadmap? What's coming up? So this is what we've got sort of on our minds right now for upcoming projects with the design system. This is all on sort of a provisional roadmap that we're working on. So we want to add the most requested new components. We want to develop an external submissions process. We want to better connect the design system website and GitHub. We want to develop a simpler, more portable canonical token format for storing our token data. We want to improve and augment our component library solution. You may have seen in the channel, like, there's some grumbling around our current component documentation system, which is called Fractal, and we're hoping to move beyond that. We want to improve our accessibility testing guidelines and automation we have, which is good, but it could be better. We want to improve tutorials for the design system. And then a couple things that are kind of looking further in the future that we want to kind of think about and blueprint out, like blueprint USWDS web components and API, thinking about what the future of the design system is through the lens of an API and through a more canonical component format. And blueprinting a canonical guidance format. So how are we collecting our guidance on the design system site in a way that's just maybe not a collection of markdown files spread across this repo? Is there any way that we could do that a little bit better to both document our own guidance and collect research and other things from other teams? So that's all provisional. We have plans to finalize and publish the 2020 roadmap in January. So we're going to be working through these roadmap questions in January, publishing something in January, and working from that going forward in 2020. So we'll be asking for input in USWDS public and on GitHub. So stay tuned for that. Question 9, how are you supporting the design system going forward? So I think the best way to think about how we're supporting the design system going forward is really that, like, we understand the importance of supporting and scaling the design system for the long term. Like, this is not just something that's coming from the design system team, but there's much broader organizational support for scaling and keeping the design system stable and growing. We understand the importance of a productive, stable core team. And really, I think the main message is, like, this design system and this core team is not going anywhere. We've been staffing up over the last few months. You may see some other people contributing to our repos and involved in issues. And we also expect to expand the core team noticeably going forward in 2020 and beyond. So I think I feel very confident in the future of the design system in our team, and I think we have ambitious plans, I think, in the roadmap for 2020, and we are getting the resources to get that done. And then question 10, what are the TTS website standards? That's certainly one we hear all the time. And at this point, I still I can't say that right now, but I can only say that if you're listening to this, if you're listening to what we've been talking about here, you're not going to be surprised. So those are the big questions of 2019. We've got a lot coming in 2020, and really we can't do it without the support of this community. So one sort of thing to think about as we wrap up this call is maybe this is an easy question for you. What do you most want the design system to build in 2020? What functionality are you most excited about, or you most need? How can the design system help you out in 2020? We're going to be talking about this over in the USWDS public Slack channel and also on GitHub in the coming weeks as we work through the roadmap, as we think about USWDS 2020. So head over to the public Slack or register for an account at chat.18f.gov. If you can't access Google Forms, reach out sort of directly to us through USWDS at gsa.gov, and we can get you going with that. And so we want to have more of a discussion around what we can do to help teams in the coming year, and what we can build, and what we can do beyond that. And shockingly enough, by my estimation, we still have about 5 minutes left in this call. So we actually do have some time for Q&A today. So I am going to try to open up the chat, see what's going on. If anyone, I can probably not go all the way back into this chat and see what's up, but if anyone has some kind of a question that they'd like to maybe re-ask here that I can try to answer in the last 5 minutes, I'm happy to give it a shot. I'm concerned that if I scroll back up, I might miss something. So yeah, if you don't have any questions, that's awesome. I'm totally, we're all excited to to keep talking about this, not just through this presentation, but through the channels I talked about, through USWDS Public, through GitHub, through email. This is something that it was a big 2019, and I think we're really just going to keep on trucking through 2020. I think that's definitely the goal. Was question 10 about TTS directly related to 21st century ideas? So yeah, the kind of question about the TTS website standards is around like what does that clause in how are we interpreting the clause in 21st century idea for the TTS website standards? It's something that has been ambiguous over the last year, and it will be less ambiguous going forward. Is 2.x going for the foreseeable future? If we're currently on 1 and looking to upgrade, is there any reason to hold off for possible 3.x release? That's a great question. My feeling is that we are not on the cusp of a sort of 3.0 level paradigm shift. I think we're only at the beginning of thinking about what the design system might mean from the perspective of 3.0. Part of what I was alluding to there in the blueprint, sort of around an API and around Thinking about different ways to present our components is something that we might be thinking about for 3.0, but that is still very much up in the air. I think that 2.x branch is probably still going to be chugging along for a year. I think there's a lot that we're doing over the course of 2020 to really improve the functionality of the design system, and I think we want to do that in the context of 2.x. So I would not expect a 3, moving to 3, I wouldn't expect that in 2020. Let's see. Any plans to support React projects on the roadmap? So I guess the most fair answer is no, not from the perspective of USWDS core. I know that there are React projects that have used the design system, and I think we could point teams to those projects as a starting point for using the design system with React. But we do not plan to do anything specifically to, let's just say, make React a canonical component format or support React directly. We stay sort of implementation agnostic for the most part and are leaving that to the community. Are there any resources for a pipeline that uses only Webpack and that doesn't require processing by gulp? Not that I'm aware of, but I think that if someone could take the resources we have for USWDS gulp, and I think that it wouldn't be a long hop over into doing something like that through Webpack. I wouldn't be surprised if someone has attempted that, and that could also be a good question for USWDS public. I think that is something, though, that we do want to think about going forward. Like, we want to resist lock-in technologies. So, you know, I know we use something like SAS a lot, and that we require processing of SAS. That's probably one that we're going to have for the foreseeable future, but I certainly wouldn't want to feel like we were getting locked into only using gulp. I just flicked the slide over, but you can still ask questions. I just wanted to bring up our general contact information, and, you know, as always, like, thank you for coming to the monthly call. Have a happy holidays. It's been a great year, and see you next decade. I think it'll be a good one. Thank you all. I appreciate it.